Have you ever wondered what really happened inside monasteries during the Middle Ages? The image we often receive is one of peace, devotion, and a life entirely dedicated to God. However, the reality behind the thick stone walls of these religious enclaves was far more complex than it seems. Monasteries were spaces full of contradictions, where rigid rules clashed with human desires that could not always be suppressed. On the outside, these buildings conveyed order and holiness, but once inside, a world of passions, secrets, and practices that defied religious norms of the time was revealed. From secret encounters and clandestine feasts to hidden passageways and private rituals, monasteries were microcosms of human nature. Before diving into these fascinating stories, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming explorations of history and the most intriguing cultures. Now, let's uncover the mysteries of medieval monasteries. Daily life in a medieval monastery seemed simple and structured. The day began at dawn with morning prayers, followed by activities like manuscript copying, gardening, and food preparation. However, this austere routine was not always enough to keep monks and nuns in strict adherence to their vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. One of the greatest challenges was boredom. Although religious study and manual labor occupied much of their time, the lack of external stimuli created an environment where the mind could wander. This led to many manuscript margins being adorned with illustrations ranging from fantastic creatures to humorous depictions of clergy in ridiculous situations. These drawings, seemingly innocent, were a way to express emotions and break the monotony. Despite the strict vows of chastity, romantic, and in some cases, intimate relationships were not uncommon in monasteries. These encounters often began with furtive glances during religious services or in dark corridors. Some documented accounts describe how such forbidden relationships led to compromising situations, including hidden pregnancies or the use of secret passageways to facilitate clandestine meetings. Nights in monasteries provided opportunities for those seeking to escape the rigid daily routine. In certain convents, nuns would leave candles burning in windows as a signal for nocturnal rendezvous. Though extremely risky, these meetings became an open secret within many religious communities. Although monasteries were known for their frugality, dietary rules were often relaxed on special occasions, such as religious festivals. Monks and nuns indulged in banquets featuring meat, fish, and abundant wine, shattering the image of austerity expected of them. At night, monastery kitchens frequently became centers of clandestine gatherings. There, forbidden foods and alcoholic beverages were shared, not only breaking fasts but also fostering a sense of camaraderie and, at times, excess. This explains why some monks were known for their obesity, a stark contrast to the discipline and self-control promoted by the church. As transgressions within monasteries became increasingly evident, ecclesiastical authorities were forced to intervene to maintain order and the appearance of holiness. Stricter rules and exemplary punishments were imposed, but these efforts often fell short, as human desires found ways to bypass even the strictest measures. Among the disciplinary tools used were isolation cells meant to punish those who broke their vows or disobeyed monastery rules. These dark, claustrophobic spaces were designed to encourage reflection and repentance, yet they frequently became places of abuse and excessive punishment, fostering resentment and discontent among monks and nuns. Superiors also implemented stricter schedules and increased nighttime surveillance when most clandestine encounters took place. However, even these measures were easily evaded by those familiar with hidden passageways and blind spots within the imposing stone structures. In many cases, abbesses and superiors played a key role in maintaining order within monasteries. Their duties went beyond spiritual leadership, as they were also responsible for enforcing rules. However, their roles were not always strict or free of complicity. Some abbesses, particularly in well-funded convents, were directly involved in acts of corruption and covered up the transgressions of their subordinates. Historical records describe convents where abbesses allowed relationships between nuns and influential visitors in exchange for donations or favors that benefited the monastery. In other instances, superiors implemented collective punishments to prevent individual actions from tarnishing the monastery's reputation. This created internal tensions and resentment among the residents, making daily life even more complicated. Medieval nuns played a fundamental role in monasteries, though their contributions were often overshadowed by those of monks. In a world where opportunities for women were limited, convents offered refuge and a platform for learning, creativity, and spirituality. Besides prayers and religious study, many nuns worked as scribes, manuscript illuminators, and creators of artwork that today stands as valuable historical treasures. However, life in convents was not as austere and disciplined as it seemed. Despite vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience, nuns faced the same temptations and human desires as anyone else. The tension between religious rules and human nature led to behaviors that have left their mark on historical records. The vow of chastity was, in theory, one of the cornerstones of monastic life. However, reality often strayed from this ideal. Many nuns entered convents not out of devotion, but because their families sent them there to avoid costly marriages or preserve family honor. In this context, some women found monastic life restrictive and sought ways to fulfill their emotional and physical needs. Historical records mention clandestine encounters between nuns and male visitors. In some cases, these meetings were consensual and carefully concealed, while in others, they resulted from abuses of power by clergy or superiors. Though officially condemned, such relationships were far more common than one might assume. To maintain appearances, convents often had isolated areas where pregnant nuns were sent until they gave birth. The babies, seen as a disgrace to the institution, were given to local families or sent to orphanages. This dark aspect of convent life highlights the contradictions between religious expectations and human nature. A nun's daily routine was strictly regulated by schedules of prayer, study, and manual labor. From dawn until dusk, their time was filled with activities meant to strengthen devotion and sustain the monastery's functioning. However, these routines did not always suffice to suppress boredom or dissatisfaction. Some nuns turned to creativity as an outlet for their emotions and thoughts. They wrote poetry, drew humorous illustrations in manuscript margins, or composed songs that strayed from traditional religious chants. These small acts of rebellion, seemingly harmless, reveal a desire to escape monotony and assert a personal identity within a highly restrictive environment. Although convents were enclosed spaces, nuns maintained constant ties with the outside world. They served as educators for noble girls, provided refuge to women in distress, and offered basic medical care to villagers. These interactions not only benefited the community, but also provided nuns with an escape from isolation. In some cases, these connections led to controversies. Historical records mention convents where nuns received male visitors too frequently, raising suspicions among ecclesiastical authorities. Despite efforts to enforce discipline, such practices persisted, particularly in convents far from religious power centers. Mysticism also played an important role in the lives of nuns. Many engaged in the interpretation of dreams, visions, and supernatural phenomena, often perceived as divine messages. While some saw these experiences as sacred, others considered them signs of heresy or pagan practices. Some nuns, known as visionaries, gained fame for their supposed spiritual powers, attracting pilgrims and devotees to the convent. These figures often found themselves at odds with religious hierarchies. Ecclesiastical practices served as a reminder that even within rigid religious frameworks, there was room for the extraordinary. The harshest punishments were a lesson to everyone in extreme situations. When transgressions were too severe or widely known, exemplary punishments were applied to discourage future offenses. These punishments included expulsion from the monastery, considered one of the worst sanctions as it left the individual without shelter or protection. Other penalties involved public penances, such as walking barefoot through the streets while praying aloud, or even the humiliation of confessing sins in front of the entire community. While these measures aimed to restore order, they often caused irreparable damage to the group's morale and cohesion. Despite all efforts to control inappropriate behaviors, many secrets managed to stay hidden within the walls of the monasteries. Underground passages and hidden cells were used not only for clandestine meetings, but also to conceal valuable goods or activities that defied norms. These secrets were passed down through generations, creating a network of complicity that challenged established power structures. Although medieval monasteries were theoretically places of devotion and purity, in practice, They often became battlegrounds between religious discipline and human desires. Festivals were a welcome break from the monotonous routine of monastic life. Although life in monasteries was marked by strict discipline, religious festivals offered a much-needed respite from the usual rules. These celebrations, dedicated to sacred events like Christmas, Easter, or the patron saint's day of the monastery, became occasions to relax and enjoy a less rigid atmosphere. During these days, prayer and work schedules were reduced, allowing monks and nuns to gather in large dining halls for special feasts. Dishes were more elaborate, featuring ingredients like fish, meats, and cakes, which were typically forbidden on regular days. Festivals were also an excuse to consume larger amounts of wine or beer, contributing to a sense of camaraderie and, in some cases, to more unruly behavior. Often, these celebrations included music and impromptu dances. The religious chants, usually sung solemnly, were transformed into more lively songs. Some historical accounts even mention that during these festivals, the barriers between the monks and visiting faithful broke down, leading to interactions that went far beyond the spiritual. Secret routes and furtive meetings provided the perfect opportunity for clandestine encounters. During preparations and celebrations, the oversight of the superiors often relaxed, allowing monks and nuns to take advantage of hidden passages and dark corners to meet out of sight. A famous example involves certain Italian monasteries where underground tunnels connected the religious chambers to nearby noble families' homes. These passages served not only to transport goods discreetly, but also to facilitate private meetings between religious figures and their benefactors. Historical accounts also mention that during festive nights, candles lit in the convent windows signaled to secret visitors. Although these practices were widely condemned by ecclesiastical authorities, they continued for centuries, particularly in more isolated monasteries where external control was limited. Christmas and its peculiarities in the monasteries. Christmas was one of the most anticipated and important holidays in medieval monasteries. In addition to solemn masses and special hymns, this date brought with it a series of unique traditions. For example, in some French convents, biblical plays were performed, which not only educated the faithful but also entertained the clergy. However, not everything was devotion. There are records of monks and nuns using the Christmas celebrations to organize secret meetings with villagers from nearby towns. These meetings, disguised as community events, included banquets and dances that lasted until late at night. In some cases, Christmas festivities were also an excuse to exchange unconventional gifts, such as manuscripts with humorous illustrations or small decorative items secretly made by the religious. Although these may have seemed innocent, they reflected a more human and less rigid side of monastic life. The role of visitors during the festivities. Religious festivals also attracted many visitors, from local peasants to nobles and high-ranking clergymen. These guests brought gifts and offerings, helping to strengthen ties between the monastery and the outside community. However, their presence also added an element of temptation, especially when it came to young nobles who caught the attention of monks or nuns. In some monasteries, visitors were accommodated in special rooms known as guest houses, where food and drink were offered. While these interactions were officially meant to encourage spirituality and cultural exchange, in practice, they often became settings for forbidden relationships. Tales of indulgence and challenges to the rules. Despite attempts to keep the festivals within a religious framework, historical accounts show that these occasions often overflowed, from excessive banquets to clandestine meetings. Religious festivities became a space where the strict monastic norms were temporarily challenged. Monasteries as economic and cultural centers. Although we often think of monasteries as purely religious spaces, in the Middle Ages, they played a crucial role in the economy and culture of their time. These communities produced essential goods such as beer, wine, cheese, and bread, which were not only consumed by the clergy but also sold to surrounding communities. In many regions, monasteries were the heart of the local economy, employing peasants and organizing markets. Additionally, monasteries were centers of knowledge. Monks and nuns painstakingly copied ancient manuscripts, preserving classical works and religious texts that would have otherwise been lost. This effort made monasteries hubs of learning, attracting scholars and travelers from all over the continent. However, this influence also had a dark side. The wealth and lands accumulated by the most powerful monasteries often put them in conflict with feudal lords and local authorities. Some records show that certain monasteries imposed high taxes on peasants under their protection, creating social tensions. Scandals and their impact on the monastic image. Despite their fundamental role in society, monasteries were not immune to controversies. In addition to rumors of relaxed rules and clandestine encounters, there were documented cases of abuse of power. Some abbots and abbesses used their position to enrich themselves by selling indulgences or demanding excessive donations. These scandals did not go unnoticed by the public or ecclesiastical authorities. On several occasions, popes and bishops sent inspectors to investigate the practices of monasteries. Although the results of these inspections were rarely made public, in some cases, the investigations led to reforms, such as the creation of new monastic orders with stricter rules. In other cases, the problems simply continued hidden. Monastic rules and their interpretation. Medieval monastic orders, such as the Benedictines, Cistercians, and Franciscans, followed strict rules that regulated every aspect of daily life, from eating and sleeping to work and prayer. However, these rules were not always applied uniformly. In some monasteries, certain infractions were overlooked, especially if the offenders were influential or wealthy. One example of this flexibility is the rule of silence. Although monks were officially required to limit their speech, exceptions were allowed during festivals or emergencies. In some monasteries, even sign language was developed to communicate without technically breaking the rule, demonstrating how creativity could overcome restrictions. The legacy of medieval monasteries. Despite the controversies and human weaknesses that marked monastic life, the impact of monasteries on European history is undeniable. They were guardians of knowledge, drivers of the economy, and centers of spirituality that shaped the culture of their time. The cathedrals and manuscripts that survived serve as testimony to their legacy, as do the stories that reveal a more human and complex side of these communities. The lives of medieval nuns, with their tensions between devotion and desire, discipline and creativity, remind us of the complexity of the human experience, even in the most enclosed environments. The convents were both spaces of oppression and opportunity, where women could find purpose, but also faced unique challenges. If you found this exploration of the hidden life of monasteries interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave us a comment with your thoughts. What do you think of these stories? Are you surprised by the secrets hidden behind the stone walls? We would love to hear from you and continue exploring the mysteries of the past together. Until the next video,